He is the most arrogant psychopath in South Korea, and every time he commits a crime, he deliberately leaves behind clues. Yet even after 30 years, the case remains unsolved. A so-called perfect high IQ crime that drove the veteran detective at the time to the brink of madness. From a 19-year-old girl living alone to a 90-year-old elderly man, a total of 20 lives were lost at his hands. Some viewers even commented that he portrayed a well-dressed psychopath to perfection. The plot is tightly connected with extreme twists, making people unwilling to fast forward even for a second. However, because the theatrical version was forced to cut 12 minutes, many viewers missed a lot of crucial details. Today I will walk you through the complete story from the director's cut in detail. If you are not strong-hearted, do not let curiosity push you to watch the original film. The movie opens with a bizarre death case. A little boy accidentally kicks his basketball into an alley, and as he goes to retrieve it, he hears a strange sound. He cautiously steps forward to check, and discovers a scene he will never forget. An elderly man has died at home, and the body is already severely decomposed. The police quickly seal off the scene and initially determine that the old man died of natural causes. But police officer Lee senses that the old man's death is not that simple. A few days earlier, a similar case had appeared locally. The victim was also an elderly person living alone, and before death his head had been struck by a blunt object and he was thrown under a bridge. At that moment, an old man pushes his way through the crowd.
뒤질라면 곱게 집구석에서 뒤질 것이지.
The old man's name is Shim Deok-soo, and both victims were his tenants. Deok-soo is someone who values money above all else, and he always demands rent in advance. When someone falls behind on rent, he goes straight to their door to pressure them, even telling them to steal or rob if necessary. In the eyes of the neighbors, he is a mean and eccentric old man, yet he has a soft spot for the owner of the toast shop. That night, Deok-soo comes to collect rent as usual. Mr. Choi used to be a criminal detective, but after facing difficulties in life, he has been unable to pay his rent. During their conversation, Mr. Choi mentions the recent deaths. The two victims were close friends of his, and every Tuesday to Thursday the church provides free lunch. They both showed up on Tuesday and Wednesday, but were absent on Thursday, so Mr. Choi suspects that they were killed on Wednesday night. In addition, a retired elderly man who kept a dog has also mysteriously disappeared, which is exactly the same pattern as the serial killings from 30 years ago. According to the pattern, the killer's next target is very likely to be a single woman. After hearing Mr. Choi's account, Deok-soo cannot help but feel worried, because two single women live upstairs. As he passes by the girl's apartment, Deok-soo overhears their conversation. Ji-eun has fallen behind on rent because she sent the money to her mother for medical treatment. After learning about Ji-eun's situation, Deok-soo temporarily gives up on collecting the rent. Late at night, when everything is quiet, the door to Mr. Choi's home slowly opens. He senses something unusual and gets up to close the door. When Deok-soo returns to Mr. Choi's home again, he witnesses a chilling scene. Mr. Choi is hanging from the door handle. The police arrive immediately to investigate the cause of death, and two volunteers mention that Deok-soo once went to Mr. Choi's door to pressure him over the rent. In an instant, Deok-soo becomes the center of public suspicion, and people begin to say that he forced Mr. Choi into his death.
사람 먹으라고 만든 거 없게 영감님한테는 안 판다고.
사람 가려서 장사하고 아주 배때기가 풀렸네.
남의 사 장사를 어떻게 하든 말든 신경 끄시고. 정말 날 때 너는 가시죠, 예?
Overnight, Deok-soo becomes a social outcast, and only Ji-eun believes in the kindness deep inside him. Although he is usually sharp-tongued and harsh, he is definitely not a bad person. Even when tenants fall behind on rent, he has never driven anyone out. In order to prove his innocence, Deok-soo opens the door to Mr. Choi's room, but as soon as he steps inside, he is suddenly attacked by a stranger. This man's name is Pyung-dal, and he used to be Mr. Choi's colleague. He does not believe that Mr. Choi would take his own life, because Mr. Choi had already bought a plane ticket and was preparing to reunite with his son. For this reason, Pyung-dal suspects that Mr. Choi must have been killed by someone. But before one wave could settle, another crisis followed. Ji-eun returned home from work as usual, only to find her best friend motionless, slumped over the toilet. When she stepped forward to support her, she realized her friend had already been brutally killed. Ji-eun was instantly terrified and at a complete loss. She frantically pulled out her phone to call the police, but suddenly the lights in the room went out. The violent crashing noise alarmed Deoksu downstairs, but he did not realize that the girls were in danger. Ji-yoon staggered as she tried to escape the room, but the attacker struck her directly on the head. The noise once again caught Deoksu's attention. Recalling that Mr. Choi had mentioned the killer might target women, Deoksu decided to go upstairs to check. Just as the killer was about to drag Ji-yoon away, the doorbell suddenly rang. Deoksu knocked on the door to ask about the situation inside, and when no one responded, he took out the spare key, only to face complaints from a young neighbor.
이 오밤중에 젊은 처자집에 뭔 볼 일이래요? 또 그놈의 월세 받으려는 갑네.
아니 내가 월세 받으려는 것이 아니고
아니 이게 무엇이 아니야? 어젯밤에 그 사람 하나 잡은 걸로도 부족합니까?
For a moment, tenants came out to watch, and Deoksu had no choice but to leave. The killer carefully cleaned up the scene and even deliberately poured a pool of blood beside the refrigerator. Early the next morning, Deoksu still decided to check on Ji-yoon's apartment. He suddenly ran into a stranger trying to open Ji-yoon's door, and when the man saw Deoksu, he panicked and ran. Deoksu quickly got on his bike and chased after him. The young man cleverly ran up the stairs, forcing Deoksu to abandon his bike and continue the pursuit. When both of them were exhausted, the young man picked up a stick and hid, striking Deoksu on the head and knocking him unconscious. When he woke up, four thugs had already surrounded him, demanding that Deoksu hand over money and leave. This scene happened to be witnessed by Pyung-dal, who picked up a brick and stepped forward to drive them away.
뭐라는 거야?
깜빵 가는 게 깜빵 새끼야.
After questioning, they learned that the young man tried to open Ji-yoon's door because he was looking for his missing girlfriend, who was friends with Ji-yoon's best friend. Afterward, Deoksu and Pyung-dal decided to open Ji-yoon's door to find out what was going on. When they entered the apartment, the room had been cleaned to an unusual degree. Pyung-dal sharply noticed small bloodstains on the bathroom floor and found a tooth in the bathtub. When they went to the kitchen, Pyung-dal saw blood on the floor, and when he opened the refrigerator, inside was the head of Ji-yoon's best friend, with dismembered body parts on the lower shelf. Looking at the blood on the floor, Pyung-dal speculated that the killer deliberately wanted them to discover the body, but strangely, Ji-yoon was nowhere to be found. Deoksu immediately chose to call the police, but Pyung-dal stopped him. He believed that since the killer intentionally left the friend's body but took Ji-yoon away, it meant Ji-yoon had only been kidnapped. If they called the police, Ji-yoon might also lose her life. Pyung-dal's guess was correct. At this moment, Ji-yoon was being held in a dim basement. In Mr. Choi's car, they found investigation files from the case years ago. The details of the crimes from 30 years ago were exactly the same as now. Back then, only one victim had survived by chance, and she was the owner of the toast shop. But due to psychological trauma, she suffered from memory loss, and the police were unable to obtain useful clues from her. Pyung-dal recalled the scene from back then. He had once seen the killer's eyes with his own eyes. At that time, Mr. Choi and the captain were on duty when the killer suddenly appeared in front of their car and turned away without saying a word. The captain found him suspicious and quickly got out of the car to chase him. The captain was fatally stabbed on the spot. By the time Pyung-dal returned with food, it was already too late. Mr. Choi was completely overwhelmed by the sudden situation. Pyung-dal would never forget the killer's gaze. He handed Mr. Choi's investigation journal to Deoksu, which listed all the suspicious individuals, and as long as they continued investigating according to the list, they could track down the killer. Based on the timeline of the crimes, the killer must now be at least around 60 years old. After several days of investigation, Pyung-dal locked onto a doctor as the prime suspect. He approached him under the pretense of being a patient, and the familiar look in the man's eyes was something Pyung-dal would never forget. Just then, the doctor's wife suddenly lost control of her bladder, forcing him to end the free clinic session and hurriedly take his wife away. Pyung-dal was certain that this man was the killer from years ago, and after further searching, they tracked down the doctor's home address. They decided to split up. Deoksu would handle picking the lock and sneak inside to search for Ji-yoon, while Pyung-dal would continue monitoring the doctor's movements and alert Deoksu if anything happened. At that moment, Deoksu heard a woman crying for help, and when he got closer, he realized it was the doctor's wife. She seemed anxious but unable to speak. Deoksu continued searching the house and found a tightly shut door. Meanwhile, the doctor finished shopping and was preparing to return home. Pyung-dal quickly called Deoksu, but Deoksu's phone was busy. Pyung-dal had no choice but to keep following, but because the market was crowded, the doctor disappeared into the crowd in the blink of an eye. As Pyung-dal searched around in panic, he was suddenly blocked by the same group of thugs from before, who were clearly there for revenge. Fortunately, Pyungdal fought them off and knocked more than a dozen of them to the ground. Just as Pyungdal was about to leave, on Deoksu's side, he was trying to break open the door, completely unaware that the doctor had already returned home. The moment Deoksu forced open the iron gate, the doctor appeared behind him. Deoksu explained that he was searching for a missing girl. The doctor calmly told him that the person he was looking for was not here and urged him to leave immediately. Deoksu sensed something was wrong. Despite someone breaking into his home, the doctor did not call the police, which clearly suggested there was something to hide. As the two argued, the injured Pyungdal arrived in time and warned the doctor to raise his hands. Deoksu took the opportunity to open the iron gate, and the sight inside shocked him on the spot. The room was filled with poppy plants, along with partially processed materials nearby. The doctor immediately knelt down and explained that these were meant to ease his wife's suffering. He begged them not to call the police, otherwise no one would take care of his wife. But Pyungdal was convinced he could not have mistaken the killer. He asked the doctor to put on a mask and once again looked closely at his eyes. The doctor had no choice but to comply.
평생 단 한 번도 네 놈을 지켜본 적이 없어.
최영사 왜 그래? 저 살인마는 죽어야 돼! 이 살인마!
Only then did they realize that Pyungdal was holding a toy gun. The doctor gestured for Deoksu to search him, and sure enough, they found a tag around Pyungdal's neck that read dementia. It turned out that he had been mistaking Deoksu for his former colleague all along. The reason Mr. Choi did not want to call the police was because he wanted to personally catch the killer and ease the guilt in his heart. After returning home, Deoksu recalled that Mr. Choi had once told him about the disappearance of the retired elderly man, and he decided to go to the old man's house that very night to take a look. At the same time, Police Officer Lee was also investigating old Han's disappearance and was driving toward his home. Deoksu arrived at the retired elderly man's residence first and found the room in complete disarray. Deoksu looked closely and saw that the man was hanging from a roof beam. The horrifying scene left Deoksu frozen in shock. He hurried outside and found a dying puppy, along with a piece of fabric and a key on the ground. Deoksu guessed that the retired elderly man must have been attacked, and the puppy bit through the attacker's pants while trying to protect its owner. The key looked familiar, and Deoksu recalled that he had once made a copy of a key for a man, and the tear in that man's pants matched the fabric perfectly. Just then, Police Officer Lee arrived at the scene, and Deoksu quickly hid. As soon as Police Officer Lee entered the house, he discovered the retired elderly man's body. Hearing the sound of a motorcycle starting, Police Officer Lee rushed outside and briefly caught sight of Deoksu's figure. Deoksu returned to the apartment complex where he had previously picked a lock, opened the killer's door, and found photos of elderly victims inside a drawer. Suddenly hearing footsteps outside, Deoksu quickly hid behind a wardrobe. It turned out that Police Officer Lee had followed him there, and he pulled out handcuffs and restrained Deoksu.
저는 지금 한씨 영감님을 살해한 용의자로 긴급 체포하는 겁니다. 똑똑히 하셔!
눈구멍이 있으면은 먼저 여기나 보고 얘기해.
Police Officer Lee noticed that the elderly people in the photos all had red crosses marked over them, and only then did he believe that Deoksu had not been lying. Inside the drawer, there was also the killer's work ID. The man's name was Bae Doo-sik. Following the address on the ID, the two of them went to Bae Doo-sik's workplace. While Police Officer Lee distracted the staff with conversation, Deoksu searched alone for the killer's whereabouts. He entered a basement and ran straight into Bae Doo-sik. Deoksu asked him whether he had kidnapped Ji-eun, but Bae Doo-sik knocked him to the ground. At that moment, Police Officer Lee rushed over after hearing the noise, but he was no match for Bae Doo-sik. Seeing Bae Doo-sik flee, Deoksu chased after him with all his strength. Bae Doo-sik thought he had successfully escaped the pursuit, but in the next second, after being struck, Bae Doo-sik's body fell, and the car immediately drove away from the scene. When Deoksu arrived, Bae Doo-sik was already barely alive. He asked him about Ji-eun's whereabouts, and Bae Doo-sik insisted that he had not kidnapped Ji-eun. Before dying, Bae Doo-sik fell into memories. Those elderly victims were indeed killed by him, and he deliberately imitated the methods of the killer from 30 years ago in order to shift suspicion away from himself. Bae Doo-sik had long set his sights on Ji-eun, but when he was about to make his move, he realized someone else had acted first. Therefore, the person who ran over Bae Doo-sik must be the one who kidnapped Ji-eun. As Bae-doo-sik's murder cases were solved, the residents finally realized that they had wrongly blamed Deok-soo. Afterward, Deok-soo went to the police station to report that he believed the killer from 30 years ago had run over Bae-doo-sik and kidnapped Ji-eun, but the police said that the murderer from 30 years ago would now be an old man, and there was no way he could kidnap a young girl. Faced with Deok-soo's explanation, the police not only refused to believe him but also drove him out of the station. With no other choice, Deok-soo went to the toast shop owner to confirm the killer's characteristics. He did not want the toast shop owner to relive the past, but in order to save Ji-eun, he had no other choice. The owner had not seen the killer's face clearly. She only remembered that he carried a fragrant scent and had one more finger than ordinary people. After obtaining this key detail, Deok-soo went to the hospital to visit Pyungdal. He was sometimes clear-headed and sometimes confused, once again mistaking Deok-soo for his colleague Mr. Choi. Yet he still insisted that the doctor was the killer from years ago. Deok-soo confronted the doctor again, pretending that he felt unwell and asking the doctor to check his pulse. By noticing the scar on the man's finger, he confirmed the killer's identity. Seeing that his identity was exposed, the doctor stopped pretending. He grabbed a tool and knocked Deok-soo unconscious, then dragged him into a hidden room. Ji-eun desperately knocked over a shelf, which woke Deok-soo up. Ji-eun tried to speak, but no sound came out. At that moment, the doctor carried his paralyzed wife into the hidden room. He told Deok-soo that Ji-eun would soon become completely paralyzed, and that he would end his wife's life and let Ji-eun take her place. He had been planning this scheme for a long time. The reason he ran over Bae-doo-sik was because Bae-doo-sik had witnessed him committing murder. Just as the doctor was about to dismember his wife, Pyungdal arrived in time. He untied Deok-soo and told him to hurry and rescue Ji-eun.
말고 나가는 게 재훈아 뭐야 빨리 나가는 게
From their conversation, the truth about what happened years ago was revealed. The person sitting in the car when the captain was stabbed was not Mr. Choi but Pyungdal, because Pyungdal was too afraid to step forward and help. The captain lost his life in the line of duty, but this time, Pyungdal was no longer afraid. He bravely fought back and engaged in a desperate struggle with the killer. Watching Pyungdal fall after being shot, the doctor showed a sinister smile. The wife beside him screamed in terror, and the doctor shot her without hesitation. Meanwhile, Deok-soo was escaping with Ji-eun, and the doctor soon spotted them. Realizing they had nowhere left to run, Deok-soo picked up a stone and charged at him, but he was no match and was quickly overpowered. Just as the doctor raised his gun to kill Deok-soo, it turned out that Pyungdal was still alive. The doctor suddenly rushed forward and tackled Pyungdal to the ground, pressing a plastic bag over his face. Seeing this, Deok-soo pulled the doctor away with all his strength, and Pyungdal once again rose up and completely subdued him. He picked up a stone from the ground and struck the killer's head. At the critical moment, Deok-soo stopped Pyungdal in time, warning that if he accidentally killed him, he would also have to bear the legal consequences. At that moment, Pyungdal cried like a child. The burden he had carried in his heart for 30 years was finally lifted. Afterward, the television reported on the case. After 30 years, the killer was finally brought to justice. At the end of the film, Pyungdal visited Mr. Choi's grave and told him that the case had been solved. In the hospital, Ji-eun recovered and was taking care of the injured Deok-soo. The toast shop owner came to visit, and the film ended amid their laughter and smiles.